We all experience lows in our creative lives. At times, it can feel like everyone else is out there making their masterpieces and landing incredible gigs while we're just sitting at home, yearning for opportunities that are just out of reach. Sometimes these struggles feel even more personal than that, like there's something about our inventiveness, our creativity, or even a technical limitation that's holding us back. Today, we're going to be taking these negative emotions head on. I've been paying close attention to my own negative emotions, writing them down as they arise. I've picked 5 of the most interesting ones to explore with you today in hopes that this can start an illuminating conversation about negativity and what it can teach us about ourselves and about our goals. Now, the word itself, negativity, is complicated and a bit of a loaded term. I don't believe that negative thinking is inherently bad. Instead, I believe that these are thoughts that are coming up as signals. They're often reverberations of unfulfilled aspects of our personal lives and creative lives that are bubbling up to tell us something. In many ways, our negative thinking is just our imagination fueled by fear. Fear of missing out socially, or fear of financial instability, or even fear of being discovered as a hack. One of my favorite Alexander Technique books, written by Alexander teacher and author Missy Vineyard, offers a fascinating perspective on this. She describes the role of the amygdala, the part of your brain that deals with fear, and how it interacts with the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of your brain that governs decision-making and thus creativity. Scientists have learned that the amygdala stimulates glands to produce what are known as stress hormones, such as adrenaline and cortisol. In the short term, these help the body cope with pain, inflammation, and injury. But if their production is sustained over a long period due to chronic activation of the amygdala, they produce an array of secondary harmful effects. Studies have linked them to an impaired memory and poor decision-making, high blood pressure, a weakened immune system, changes in brain chemistry, heart disease, and arthritis. The sensations of our emotions, specifically fear and anxiety, are an unintended consequence, the shimmering after effect of the amygdala's activation, that reverberate upward to our awareness like waves after a pebble breaks the water's surface. There is only an endlessly self-reflecting and distorted image in our minds, which holds surprising power to influence our behavior and shape our inner life. These words from Missy Vineyard really illuminate what we're going to be talking about today, which is the way that fear and anxiety shape our thinking and our relationship to our creative lives. Now that we have a working definition of negativity and fear, it's time for me to open up about some of my own. I have a feeling that some of this may be relatable to you, so if you feel inclined to share or comment on what you're hearing, I would love it if you left a comment below and told me about how some of this stuff strikes you. And if you want to know the truth, something that strikes fear and negativity into my heart and mind is the thought of unsubscribed viewers watching this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the button below. It really helps grow this channel and it means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Oh man, I wish I could do that. Maybe jazz guitar has just been a big waste of time and really I should be focusing on doing that instead. Wait, but this is really hard. This is way harder than I thought it was. This is gonna take me forever.
We've all had those reality strikes moments when we realize that maybe we've overestimated our abilities, or we notice that someone else is much further on the same path that we're also on. These moments can trigger fear. Fear that we missed the boat on a specific style, a skill, or an instrument that we once thought was possible for us. There was a time in my life when this kind of fear would really throw me off course. I'd be working on something deeply personal, like a practice topic I was really interested in, or a composition that really felt like it represented me. And then I'd go out and hear music and hear someone doing something at a high level that was unrelated to what I was working on, but that I felt envious of nonetheless. This would lead me down rabbit holes to topics such as slide guitar, synthesizers, or even mix engineering. Topics that I'm really interested in, but that are still peripheral to the main skills that I've been developing over the years as a jazz and improvising guitarist. Even though some good came of it, I would usually burn out on these topics, feeling exasperated that I wasn't as good as so and so, or noticing just how long it was going to take of devoted practice to get to a high level with these skills. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with taking on a new skill or a new instrument, but we have to manage our expectations and integrate these new skills into the person we are today, as opposed to overhauling our entire sense of self to try and fit a new archetype. This is especially common among jazz musicians who think that because they've studied an elite art form or a sophisticated art form, that they can then become great blues guitar players or great songwriters just because the building blocks of that music are perceived as being more elementary. But that's not how it works. Being a great slide guitar player or being a master synth programmer or a great mix engineer are their own distinct paths that require decades of study, just as I've put in decades of work on the guitar. What's harder is being comfortable with where you're at and what your limitations are and what your skill sets are and how to get deeper into those things. I've benefited greatly from learning about synthesizers and getting some slide playing under my fingers and learning to mix my own music. But I've gotten really burned out trying to be those things, trying to shift overnight and tell myself, okay, I'm gonna be a slide guy now, or I'm gonna have like a wall of synths and just be that guy. It's all these different personalities should become integrated into who you are, as opposed to you ditching everything you've done for the past 15, 20 years because it's not as interesting to you for some reason. It's important to be grateful for the amount of work that we've put into our existing selves, even though we might be tired of it sometimes, and understand that any new skill needs to be brought into the fold to make us more complete versions of who we are today.
Oh man, this is their first YouTube video ever, and it has thousands of views. My first video had like 30 views.
Last week, a video popped up by an excellent young musician. It caught my attention because the video was about one of my favorite jazz standards, Stella by Starlight. The video did an excellent job exploring the harmonic structure, the history, and a lot about the composer, Victor Young. But beyond that, it was a deeply personal video sharing some tender moments from the creator's life. As I scrolled through the comments, one comment stuck out to me in particular. It was one that read, "Most overpowered first YouTube video ever." And that's when I realized this was, in fact, the creator's first YouTube video. And it had thousands of views, and all the comments were really enthusiastic about the quality of the video and how interesting it was. That's when my fear brain kicked in. My first video only had 30 views. It was nowhere near as good or as stylistically interesting as this guy's video was. Will I ever make anything that interesting or compelling? Why haven't any of my videos had this kind of impact on people? A few moments later, I caught myself. I wasn't going to let my negative thoughts drag me down, but instead, I was going to listen to them. What about this person's videos made me so envious of their skill and their style? What can I learn from this video that I'm not doing in my own videos? That line of questioning led me to arrive at an important conclusion, one that's been really helpful for me as someone that's making art and YouTube videos. What video could I make that, if someone else made it, I would be super envious of? Now that's a question that leverages my natural jealousy, maybe slightly envious nature, and turns it into a productive thought. This question forces me to interrogate myself and ask, what really motivates me and drives me, and what kind of video would I want to watch myself? As makers, we can often become divorced from the viewer, even though we are both of those things. Just like in music, we're both composer or player and listener. Keeping in touch with both sides of that relationship is key for any productive creative endeavor. In developing this rhetorical question, I was able to translate that negative fear and anxiety I was feeling when I watched this awesome video that I loved into a more productive impulse. One that forces me to take risks and ask daring questions of what I can do with my work.
The music industry was so much better 30 years ago. Streaming has completely ruined any chance I had of making money from my music. I'm never releasing music again.
It's no secret that the music industry is in shambles. This can be a depressing reality, especially for me as a millennial, someone that came of age during the final gasp of the music industry. When I was growing up, the music industry was operating like it always had for decades, by selling CDs. But that was quickly changing, and by my mid-teens, Napster and LimeWire had completely disrupted this ecosystem, and we're on our way to what we know now with streaming. Younger musicians, unlike millennials, I think are better equipped to deal with the music industry today because they're less attached to how things were or how they were promised us to be. They accept the realities of an internet-based music distribution system and even embrace it in a way that millennials haven't and still see as a sort of compromise. I've spent a lot of time commiserating with other musicians about the state of the industry, but the truth is that time is wasted because we're not actively looking for solutions to the problems in these conversations. We're just staying stuck and talking about how bad things are. For better and for worse, industry disruption always provides a creative opportunity for rebuilding. Spotify is an excellent example of rebuilding with corporate interests in mind, not the artists. I think if artists got involved in the rebuilding process, as opposed to lamenting the past or what was promised to us, we could find a future that's more equitable for musicians. While it's understandable to mourn the loss of an industry that seemed like it could provide us with stability in a career, I keep coming back to asking questions of myself around value. What can my collaborators and I offer to audiences that the megastars and algorithms can't? Platforms like Patreon and Substack have come around to empower independent artists and help them engage with their audience directly and even make careers and financial stability from it. This new economy has been so inspiring to me and was a big motivator in me starting my YouTube channel. I wanted to connect with people like you who are interested in the same topics as I was and build a career around delivering these kinds of videos or artistic works to people who really want to hear it. Engaging with possibility, even if it's a long shot remote possibility, is so much healthier than inhabiting this defeatist mindset. It's all too easy to use the state of the industry as an excuse to not release any music. But I'd like to leave you with this interview from Pat Metheny, where he talks about releasing his seminal album, Bright Size Life.
Metheny looked back at the legacy of Bright Size Life.
You know, when it came out, it was moderately, successful, I guess. It sold, 800-900 copies and got a couple reviews, medium-y kind of reviews, and it really wasn't till about 10 or 15 years later that people really noticed it. And now it's in the Smithsonian. I mean, it's a classic, everybody says, but it was really not perceived that way at the time. I've seen that kind of again and again and again, and more to the point, most of the people that are really enthusiastic about Bright Size Life are people who were not born at that time. I notice this again and again and again, that the people who really get hip to something, first of all, it may take 15 years before they really do. But
it's important to release your music no matter how out of step it might be with the zeitgeist, no matter what the state of the world or the industry is like. Remember that your audience may not even be alive yet. By putting music out on the internet, you're leaving it out there forever. So in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, someone might come around and enjoy your music and show it to all their friends, and that might start a movement that you could have never anticipated.
All my guitar buddies showed up to the show, and I'm not sounding as good as I should. I feel weird about all of them being here, and nothing's coming out right.
Playing for a small group of your peers in a quiet cafe can be way more daunting than playing for a packed room full of strangers at a club. In these intimate settings, we might feel hyper aware or maybe feel that we're being scrutinized by the people whose approval we seek. Just last week, I had a casual bar gig where a few of my guitar buddies showed up to support. I felt a bit off. The bar was loud, the piano was really out of tune, and I had to turn up my guitar way louder than I usually do, so I was fighting feedback the whole night with my archtop. It's not the ideal sonic situation. In that moment, I had to suck up the discomfort and the frustration with how the music was coming across and the fact that maybe it didn't sound good, and just focus on what I could control. Persevering through the chaos of a noisy bar to deliver subtle and nuanced music like jazz is no easy feat. But once we let go of these rigid expectations, we can begin to learn things about the fundamentals of delivering music to an audience, what it means to entertain, and let go of some of our little priorities we have about the music. And we can learn a lot about music fundamentals that way. It's also worth remembering that if your friends have showed up, you've already won. They're here to support you, and they've been in similar situations as musicians themselves. More often than not, instead of judging you, your fellow guitar friends, like-minded, are there to commiserate with you and help you through the night. As it happens, that very same gig, it was so crowded that someone knocked over one of the monitor stands and it almost hit my guitar, were it not for one of my guitar buddies that was there to help get the guitar out of the way while I was outside. So instead of sitting there and judging all my mistakes and how my guitar was feeding back, etc., my guitar friends were there to help me through the night.
What I'm writing right now is okay, but it's not anywhere near as good as so-and-so's music that I heard last week.
In How Music Works, the great book by David Byrne from Talking Heads, he talks about how detrimental a scene can be to the individual artist. As social creatures, it's natural for us to form groups and cliques and artistic scenes, but I resonate with this idea nonetheless that the large group can be detrimental to the individual if that individual doesn't have a good sense of when to isolate themselves from the group. As someone who often hears inner voices of past teachers or collaborators or people that I admire on the scene that I'm a part of, this is a really big deal for me. Figuring out how to relate to the scene that you're a part of as an individual is a really important aspect of developing your identity and your integrity as an individual. As musicians, we're naturally inspired by the people around us and take note of all the cool ideas that are circulating in our scene. I try to do this intentionally when I'm in between projects. I'll go out and hear as much music as I can or explore new ideas that I haven't yet tackled. As a personal strategy, however, when I do enter a new phase of composition or deep work, I tune all other influences out. Even my childhood influences, all that stuff, it goes out the window and I try to just relate to the music in the way that I know how to. I make a conscious effort to tune out the voices, tune out the influences, and just rely on what I've developed and what I've already absorbed to that point. Once I feel like I've accrued enough ideas, either from my external world of other musicians that I play and go listen to, or my inner world of listening to music and grappling on to new ideas, I intentionally make the effort to tune out all other influences and just sit facing the blank sheet of paper and just rely on my own intuition and my own ideas. Now, obviously, my own ideas is just the aggregate of everything that I've ever been influenced by and thought of and created for myself. But it's important to not rely on external factors or external voices or opinions when you're in this process of composing music. This doesn't mean that you can't collaborate on a composition, but perhaps when you're collaborating on that composition with another songwriter or composer, you might impose the limit of not having so much external influence, just relying on what the two of you can think of in the moment with your own resources. Do those negative thoughts still creep in? Yes, of course they do, especially when I'm stuck or dissatisfied with the results. But I have a goal to be self-reliant and to answer the questions that I have on my own accord without going to others for help. There's a time and place for that when you're trying to improve your compositional skills or when you're trying to learn. But then there's a time to just sit with your own abilities and limitations. I also remind myself that this process should be enjoyable and about exploring, not about achieving a certain kind of result. When we begin the composition process by having a premeditated goal in mind, like a really specific one, we often disappoint ourselves quickly because the composition process doesn't really work that way. We can establish forms and harmonies, but the truth is we have to listen to the composition and to what the composition wants, and it doesn't always line up with where we want it to go. I would really love to hear from you guys in the comment section. I know I touched upon a lot of topics today, but I know that some of it will resonate with you, and I'd love to hear your experiences. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so below. It means a lot to me. Keep listening to those dark thoughts, write them down, and answer them. Deal with them. See you next time.